01 Because of an accident, Chu Ling's life changed completely. On the day he was celebrating his birthday at the hotel with his friends, he was dragged into a cubicle by a strange man who had been drugged in the bathroom. Before he could understand what was going on, his neck was bitten. A powerful and unfamiliar alpha pheromone came towards him, instantly surrounding him. Chu Ling is an omega, and in a week, his estrus period will come. But because of the strong stimulation of the gland being bitten, the estrus period comes earlier. The AO fusion pheromone diffused in the small compartment, becoming more and more intense, constantly stimulating the original desire of the two of them. The temporarily marked Chu Ling was almost suppressed by Alpha's strong desire to dominate. He wanted to escape, but he didn't have the strength to resist. Sorry, it was an accident. The man also seemed to regain his senses slightly from the accidental temporary mark. But he didn't stop there. Instead, after apologizing to Chu Ling, he picked him up horizontally before he completely lost consciousness, and took the elevator to the top room. The man seemed to notice it, suppressed his desire to invade and occupy, gently wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, and after a long silence he said, "I will be responsible." After that night, Chu Ling was completely marked. He had an alpha boyfriend who had already talked about marriage, but was interrupted by this accident. In this era of equal human rights, although Omega is no longer regarded as a reproductive machine, there is still a consistent nature in the bones of the alpha that marks itself. On the contrary, alpha has no such scruples. They can mark multiple omegas at the same time. This unequal phenomenon caused many omegas to commit suicide in the early days, and is the main reason why the number of omegas is still scarce today. Later, the government forced the intervention. In order to protect the rare and weak omega, it was mandatory for the fully marked alpha and omega to marry. Although such a policy is not the best, and whether both parties like it or not, from the perspective of omega mortality, there is indeed a significant reduction. Chu Ling never thought that such an accident would happen to him. He used inhibitors for a long time, and even planned to complete this ritual with his alpha boyfriend when the next estrus period came. Unexpectedly, it was such an accident that completely destroyed his life plan. At this moment, Chu Ling and his boyfriend Lin Xian are calmly discussing the breakup. Lin Xian is a good-tempered person and a very considerate lover. Since his relationship with Chu Ling, he has been extremely caring and considerate, and he has hardly ever been wronged. Although he couldn't accept this fact, he couldn't blame Chu Ling either. However, when Chu Ling smelled the pheromones left by other alphas, it really made him feel bad. Chu Ling knew that Lin Xian was such a person. While he felt guilty and annoyed, he was also heartbroken. Even if the body belongs to someone else, the heart cannot be taken back so easily. After the two were relatively silent for a long time, Chu Ling said first, "I know that I am sorry for you. It doesn't matter if you want to blame me, but I hope you know that I still love you." Lin Xian actually wanted to say it's not your fault, but he was also a victim, and he didn't even have the power to criticize. After he opened his mouth for a while, he said helplessly, "You know I don't mean that. Aren't you mad at all?" Lin Xian frowned tightly and said, "I'm so angry, I'm going crazy. But what can I do? Anger can't change the truth." "Yeah, so." Chu Lingqiang endured the grief in his heart and said, "We're done here too." If so, he still had to speak. "Nian Hua." Lin Xian still felt very sad when he saw how he was holding back from crying. "You must find someone better than me." Chu Ling lowered his head, not wanting the other party to see the tears that burst from his eyes, "Otherwise I can't forgive myself." Lin Xian stretched out his hand to pat Chu Ling's shoulder, but when he felt an unfamiliar alpha's breath, he silently retracted his hand. He looked at Chu Ling silently, unable to say any comfort, and finally said bitterly, "I wish you happiness." 02 The alpha who marked Chu Ling was called Honggu. Honggu is 27 years old this year, and he is already the boss of a well-known listed company at a young age. In the business field, He has a strong style, and he is decisive. While opening up a path of his own, he has also offended many people. The day he met Chu Ling, he was drugged by his nemesis. Considering Han Gu's worth, he didn't have to worry about what kind of omega he wanted, but that day he met Chu Ling while hiding in the bathroom, and fortunately, he stimulated him to the point of estrus. It's not just Chu Ling, but Han Gu as well. Originally, a one-night stand was nothing to him, but when he met an omega who was in estrus, he had to accept his fate. Han Gu arranged everything within a few days after the end of Chu Ling's estrus period. Before the two had no relationship foundation, the marriage was too fast, so he planned to let's start with cohabitation for now. Anyway, no matter what, the bond to each other in this life will never be broken. Chu Ling has no objection to this. Omega will become dependent on those who mark him, and this nature makes him have to surrender. During the period when he was dealing with his own emotional problems, he only didn't see Han Gu for about a week, and he began to feel that something was wrong. In the days when he was in estrus, he had no way to pay attention to what Han Gu looked like. Until now, he only saw this handsome and somewhat cold man when he was awake. Judging from where he lives and how he dresses, it is not difficult to see that the other party seems to be quite rich. When he knew that the other party's name was Han Gu, he couldn't help but be stunned. Even if the field of work is different, Chu Ling knows Han Gu, who is known as a genius in the contemporary business world. But he couldn't imagine that this man with a strong style would have a day when he was drugged. However, based on some kind of resistance, he didn't want to ask the other party about it. In the first week of cohabitation, the two were relatively silent at home. Han Gu has a more business-like attitude, going to work and going home to sleep. Although the two live together, they still live in separate rooms. The very different nature of work makes them hardly see each other several times a week. Chu Ling is just a small employee in the workplace. His regular 9-to-5 routine gives him extra free time on weekdays. In the past, he and Lin Xian would go to each other's house for dinner, watch a movie together, chat, talk about interesting things about their work, and even plan where to go on holidays. The days passed so dull and happy. But now he doesn't even have the right to meet with Lin Xian. Returning to the empty house and letting him sit on pins and needles, perhaps this is also not affected by the constant comfort of Han Gu's alpha pheromone. Chu Ling began to lose sleep, until he felt that Han Gu came back in the middle of the night, and he was able to sleep peacefully. After marking, both parties can easily sense each other's psychological state. And the omega who is in a bad mood can only be comforted by his own alpha, and no one can do it for him. Before living together, Han Gu had already inquired about Chu Ling and knew that he had an alpha boyfriend. If it wasn't for his accidental appearance, maybe they would have been happily preparing for the wedding now. But Chu Ling doesn't seem to have a chance to make up for it. Not only was Han Gu aware of this omega's resentment towards him, but he was also vigilant at all times, vigilant and repelling his approach. Even when his spirits are sluggish due to a lack of his own comfort, he stubbornly wants to fight his instincts. Han Gu could easily use Alpha's coercion to stop Chu Ling's wasted effort, but he didn't do it. Maybe he thought it was a good opportunity to let this omega vent, or maybe he just wanted to know what the other party's hard work could achieve, but no matter what, such indulgence was definitely not because of love. In the final analysis, no one can be willing to have such consequences because of being framed. After standing in the living room for a while, Han Gu turned around and went back to the room. Almost when Han Gu went out, Chu Ling woke up at the same time. The instinctive bond and influence between AO is much deeper than he imagined, and he has never hated their relationship more than now. After finally staying up until Saturday, Chu Ling forced himself to sleep for a while before getting up. Although he abused himself mentally, he was not lazy and passive. With moderately soft and hard muscles, it feels good in the hand and does not appear weak. Lin Xian once fell in love with this kind of touch, and would often shoot off when he touched it. In the end, the two of them didn't do anything and just rolled the sheets for a day. But that's all in the past. Although it has been a month since the breakup, whenever Chu Ling thinks of the past, she still can't help but feel sad. He and Lin Xian are high school classmates. This relationship has been long distance running for 8 years. It was born under the blessing and expectation of everyone. They have gone through all kinds of hardships, long distance love, from a two-way secret love to the current unswerving love for each other. Just when everyone believed that they would definitely succeed in cultivation, such an unbelievable thing happened. How ridiculous! Chu Ling shook his head and smiled bitterly when he thought of this. He has been depressed for a long time, and it is time to change his mood. Chu Ling then changed into light clothes and planned to walk around. After he followed Han Gu into the high-end luxury residential area, he never walked outside except during commuting time. The security of this community is very strict. There is a shopping street outside the community, and the living functions are convenient. Chu Ling wandered about casually, and found a supermarket around the corner. After eating out for a long time, he felt very tired. When he was thinking about which ingredients to buy while he was free today, he saw a familiar figure walking by not far in front of the supermarket. Chu Ling's head went blank at the moment, and he chased after him regardless of anything. He suddenly remembered that when he was in college, he and Lin Xian were separated from each other. At that time, they were about to enter the society, and they all had their own thoughts, and because they liked freedom, there were many conflicts. They often quarreled on the phone, and quarreled when they met. The quarrels were all trivial matters. It was rare for both parties to find time to see each other and quarreled. They were too busy to have time to meet and quarrel. Reason: they were too familiar with each other, and they were even more rude when they spoke. Although Lin Xian had always had a gentle and forbearing temper, he couldn't help quarreling so frequently, and finally broke out unbearably. Since that big fight, they have been in a cold war for nearly a month. In the end, Lin Xian bowed his head first, and he spared all the time to run to find Chu Ling. The moment Chu Ling saw Lin Xian, he put all the contradictions behind him and laughed happily. This time is so similar to that moment. Chu Ling ran wildly on the street, anxious as if he would miss the figure in the blink of an eye. He hadn't seen each other for more than a month, and he had already agreed to break up, but he still couldn't help losing control when he met unexpectedly, whether it was impulsive or unfinished. At this moment he didn't care about anything. Don't care anymore. His anxiety and panic alarmed passers-by, and everyone made way for him. Chu Ling finally came behind the man, grabbed the corner of his clothes, and called out excitedly and eagerly, Lin Xian. He frowned, rarely returning to the room as usual, but went straight to knock on Chu Ling's door. Chu Ling felt Han Gu's unpleasant breath in the air. He hesitated for a moment, and finally opened the door. Han Gu is leaning in front of the door, frowning at him. This is the first time the two of them have looked at each other directly since they lived together. To describe. Chu Ling couldn't bear the oppression of the other party for too long, so he quickly looked away and said, "What's the matter with you?" Chu Ling was not happy when he heard this. "I just went out for a walk." "Just walking around, will it be so rich that it will be contaminated?" Han Gu thought for a while, then suddenly asked, "Who did you meet today?" Chu Ling was forced to answer his question, Lin Xian. Although Han Gu sighed, Chu Ling felt the pressure in the air heavier and heavier. There was already a cold sweat on his back, but he was still not to be outdone. "You can't do this, you destroy us, you can't, let me not even have a chance to see him." "I didn't say that." "But that's what you meant to do." Han Gu did not answer. Silence is equivalent to default. Chu Ling roared, "You can't. You have no right to stop us from meeting." "Then what do you want me to do?" Han Gu suppressed the anger caused by instinct very well, and said in a helpless tone, "I want to let my Omega go back to other men." Burn. These words silenced Chu Ling. "Although I forced you, the facts are already in front of you. I have given you time to adjust, so you really can't think about it. Chu Ling shook his head sadly. You don't understand at all. Han Gu confessed, I have never been in love, and I really don't understand. But I said that I will be responsible, so I won't watch you do anything wrong. Chu Ling did not speak. Even if I can suppress my instincts well. What about you? After being with Lin Xian, what are you going to do? Go to bed with him and let him tag you again? It's an Omega, and he should know better than me what repeated marking will do to you. Besides, even if you are willing, is Lin Xian willing to let you take the risk? If you are not completely marked AO, you will not get any pleasure. Enough! Chu Ling said angrily, and then fell down as quickly as if he had been drained of strength. His figure swayed slightly. Don't say it. Han Gu stared at him for a while, and suddenly realized that his condition was not very good at the moment. He frowned and said, You have lost a lot of weight. Leave me alone. The voice was almost inaudible. How can I ignore you? Since I moved here, you have been very wary of me. Han Gu suddenly stopped here and said in a softer tone, It's me wrong. When Chu Ling heard this sentence, she felt a shiver all over her body, and her goosebumps all stood up. He even asked in horror, What did you do? I'm afraid I'll have to use a little more forceful means. You. Before Chu Ling could speak, the man blocked his lips. 03 Chu Ling was pressed on the bed. He couldn't resist Han Gu's kiss at all. Being kissed by his own alpha is comfortable and pleasant, and he couldn't help but want to open his mouth to meet it. But his spiritual consciousness refused to cooperate. He just said goodbye to his old lover and immediately went to bed with others. He couldn't do anything about it. Of course Han Gu knew what Chu Ling was thinking, and slowly and unreservedly exerted his coercion. The tip of his tongue licked between the tightly closed lips, inducing him to slowly open his mouth. Chu Ling screamed uncontrollably, but she was obviously still trying to resist the rise of love and desire. Relax, don't refuse. Han Gu took the opportunity to hold Chu Ling's lips, licking and biting them from time to time. Ugh! Chu Ling is still stubbornly resisting. The confrontation between spirit and reason is the most tormenting. Don't. Han Gu had no choice but to coax him in another way. It's not your fault, I forced you. These words seemed to work. Chu Ling was stunned, and the struggle gradually weakened. Although Han Gu does not understand love, he can understand this feeling like betrayal. Even if Chu Ling didn't do it voluntarily, in a sense, he already thought that he had betrayed Lin Xian. This kind of mental torture of the self is the most terrifying. Although Han Gu had let things go at first, he couldn't stand idly by when he saw the extent of Chu Ling's self-abuse. Lin Xian will be worried if you are like this. Han Gu spoke softly while kissing him, Don't be afraid, let me help you. I am your alpha. The strong taste of love and desire instantly permeated the room. Han Gu didn't go any further, even though his titular Omega is now obedient and can do whatever he wants. He just soothed the other into a deep sleep before leaving the room. Chu Ling slept deeply for a long time. He has not slept well for nearly a month. When he woke up, he couldn't tell what time it was. He froze for a while, and then slowly recovered. Recalling that at that time, he woke up from the end of the estrus period, and his whole person was almost desperate. What could be worse then? Chu Ling thought to himself. He got up and got out of bed, opened the curtains, and found that it was still bright outside. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, so he slept for 16 hours. He first went to the bathroom to take a shower, then opened the door, and was thinking about what to do when he suddenly found Han Gu sitting on the sofa. His body suddenly stiffened unnaturally. Why are you here? Han Gu raised his eyebrows and said, Today is Sunday. Chu Ling didn't answer, but he was thinking that you were never at home on Sundays. Han Gu seems to have heard what Chu Ling did not say. I will try my best to stay at home and accompany you from now on. These words made Chu Ling's sense of crisis come out again. Don't be so wary of me, I won't do anything to you without your consent. Chu Ling stopped talking. Honggu took advantage of this time to say, "Do you know what you have done to yourself? When you were asleep, I asked the family doctor to see, anemia, lack of sleep, blood sugar if it's too low, I almost have to go to the hospital for a drip. I forget it, it's half my fault, I didn't take a good look at you." He didn't know what Honggu should look like in other people's impressions, but the strong Honggu in his imagination should not look like this. He really wasn't calm enough for the past month. After shouting a few words with Honggu yesterday, he felt much better. He was quiet for a while, but still felt that he should say thank you. "Thank you." Honggu seemed a little stunned, but he quickly asked, "What's going on?" Chu Ling looked at each other suspiciously. "What did Lin Xian say to you? Your reaction yesterday is very strange." Chu Ling stared blankly at the other party, unable to answer for a while. "Can't you tell me?" "No. I just don't know what to say." Chu Ling really didn't know what to say. Yesterday, Lin Xian turned around and saw his first move, which was to grab him by his clothes. Horn's hand was thrown away. This was completely impossible before. Honggu seemed to understand something from his expression. He said, "If he does something to make you sad, it is not because of you, but because you have my pheromones on you." Relationship. When Chu Ling heard this, he suddenly raised his eyes to look at Honggu. "If so, I hope you can understand." Chu Ling lowered his head and nodded silently. "Don't show such an expression. I have tried very hard to restrain Alpha's instinct." "This instinct," Honggu said here, did not continue, just said, if you understand what you are doing, I will not stop you from meeting, which is already my biggest concession." Chu Ling was very surprised that an alpha would say such a thing. "But at least don't think of other men when I can see." 04 After that conversation, life returned to normal. Honggu is still working in the morning and back home, and he doesn't see each other several times a week. After Chu Ling thought about Honggu's words carefully, he calmed down completely. He knew that he was really impulsive at that time, and should not have any expectations to go to Lin Xian. No matter how much he misses each other, how much he loves each other, this kind of entanglement is destined to have no good results. Before he could not look at this matter calmly, he decided not to meet Lin Xian for the time being. In order not to let himself continue to think wildly, Chu Ling began to find things to do. The grocery shopping in the supermarket yesterday was interrupted because he met Lin Xian. He went to buy ingredients when he was off work, and some daily necessities. Although Honggu is rich, he does not hire a domestic helper. He only finds regular workers once a week for cleaning and shopping. Chu Ling guessed that it might have something to do with his irregular life and rest. He thought about it, and he bought a lot of things before he knew it. When he brought it home, it was a big bag, and he was so tired that he stood at the door and gasped for a while. He wanted to sort the things he bought, but only after a month found that he was very unfamiliar with this place. He smiled helplessly, took some time to find out every corner of the room, and then put things away, and it was already 9 o'clock when it was time to eat dinner. After eating, he packed up the utensils. At this time, he thought of a question. Did Honggu eat? Shouldn't he be prepared for his portion? Although Chu Ling is very sure that as Honggu, the people around him will not make him hungry, but he comes back so late every day, even if he is not hungry, he should be tired. Although he has always warned himself not to meddle in his own business, but relying on others, coupled with the concern from the last time, made him unable to ignore him even if he couldn't understand him. If there is any complaint in my heart, it is not without. It's just that he has passed the age of relying on others, not everything can be solved by a willful tantrum like before. He thought about it for a while, and finally got a few easy-to-digest side dishes and put them in the refrigerator, and left a note on Honggu's door before going back to the room. When Honggu returned home, he first felt Chu Ling's stable mood swings, and then he smelled the faint aroma of food. He was a little surprised that Chu Ling wanted to open it so quickly, and after changing his shoes, he was about to go to his room, only to accidentally see the message on his door again. He walked to the front of the refrigerator, opened it, smiled, closed the refrigerator, and walked back to his room. Chu Ling woke up in the morning and found that the food from last night had not been passive, and he was not discouraged. After eating the leftovers and side dishes from last night, it became his own breakfast. There was still a meeting to be held in the morning, so he had to arrive early. After rushing to finish the meal, thinking about what to do in the evening, he packed up and went out. That night, after Chu Ling finished eating, he hesitated for a while, but decided to challenge Honggu's supper again. He didn't know the reason why Honggu didn't eat, whether it was because he was not hungry, didn't like it, or something else, but no matter what it was, Honggu didn't stop him from doing it. In terms of Honggu's personality, if he doesn't like it, he will reject it directly, without dragging its feet, and without ambiguity. Chu Ling couldn't say why, but he always had a sense that Honggu let him do it, even if there was no conversation between them. On the first day, do not eat. The next day, do not eat. On the third day, do not eat. On the fourth day, still do not eat. However, after changing to different supper patterns for several days in a row, Honggu didn't even take a bite. Chu Ling thinks that his craftsmanship is good, and Lin Xian was full of praise before, which made him very proud, but when he came to Honggu, it seemed that it had no effect at all. When he thought of Lin Xian, he was a little depressed, but he immediately cheered up. He has decided to stop thinking about it, even if those good memories of the past made him more uncomfortable, and he couldn't help the urge to call him every time, but he endured it. He knew he couldn't do anything and had to let time figure it out. After all, after talking about the relationship for so long, how could it be possible to just let it go? Chu Ling continued to absent-mindedly prepare a late-night snack for Honggu. At this time, he realized that he had not been to the supermarket for several days, and the ingredients were not enough. After thinking about it, he didn't know what else to do. He simply cooked the leftover rice and side dishes into a pot of porridge, and added some seafood ingredients. Although it didn't look very good, he was sincere. What surprised him most was that Honggu actually ate it tonight. Chu Ling was in a daze for a while, but he still couldn't understand Honggu's taste. But this matter really aroused his curiosity. He planned to do some experiments, so he prepared 3 kinds of supper every night, and one of them was porridge with various ingredients. It went on like this for nearly 2 weeks, with no exception. Except for the porridge, nothing was touched. Chu Ling felt incredible. At this time, it is very easy to feel that Honggu is actually very stubborn, and he can even eat something he likes for several nights without getting tired of it. I wonder if he does the same with the people he likes? This thought flashed through Chu Ling's mind inexplicably. He was startled by his sudden thought, but soon he could only smile bitterly. Whether this person has appeared or not, he and Honggu are destined to be bound together in this life. 05 After another month, Chu Ling is quite used to this kind of life now. Even if he occasionally had to face Honggu alone at home, he was just a little nervous. Yes, it is already nervous, not alert. Since the last kiss, Honggu did not do anything to Chu Ling as agreed. Chu Ling gradually let go of his guard while getting along with Honggu, but the pressure that Alpha unintentionally revealed would still affect him. This is especially the case in some unspeakable way. As Honggu said earlier, both parties who are not completely marked AO will not get any pleasure. Therefore, for the necessary physiological needs, he could only find Chu Ling. But due to his previous promise, although he couldn't do anything to Chu Ling directly, he could at least solve it in the place closest to Chu Ling, because the marked omega pheromone would allow him to better release his desires. So one night, when Chu Ling was asleep, he was awakened by the alpha pheromone released by Honggu. The unbearably strong and lustful smell made his scalp tingle and his whole body softened. Not to mention that a normal beta also has physiological desires and desires. After holding back for 2 months, the desire for desires and desires is only high. This was nothing, but Chu Ling was completely affected. Even through a layer of walls, he could still smell the smelly sweet smell in the air. He knew what Hanggu was doing, which made his face flush with shame. Although the memory of the estrus period was very confusing, he was still stimulated by this situation to recall the fragment of the two crazy intertwined. He bit his lip tightly, trying to calm himself down when another voice sounded vigilantly in his mind. He wants to escape, he must escape. Can't stay here any longer, Hanggu will get out of control, he will get out of control, just like when he was tagged. Chu Ling can't care about what time it is in the middle of the night, he can't care that he is only wearing pajamas. Panic has completely dominated his brain. Those unbearable scenes are like a revolving lantern, causing him the most deep guilt. Can't be betrayed again. Can't betray Lin Xian. He stumbled out of bed, not even realizing he made a loud noise, opened the door with trembling hands, and rushed towards the door quickly. He had already held the doorknob, and when he was about to turn it open, a voice came from Hanggu's closed door. Chu Ling. At that moment, he felt that the blood in his whole body was almost frozen. Because of the call of his alpha, he could no longer move forward. Come here. Chu Ling couldn't control his steps towards Hanggu's room, and he couldn't control his trembling body. When Chu Ling stopped in front of Hanggu's door, the door was opened. Then a hand suddenly dragged him in and quickly pressed him against the closed door. Chu Ling closed his eyes tightly. He didn't want to look at all, or in other words, he was avoiding anything that might happen next. Sexual life is a natural thing for the completely marked AO2 parties, but if the union is not the will of the two parties, it is a kind of torture. But even if it doesn't want it, the body wants it. The expected did not come, but Chu Ling heard Hanggu's voice first. Look at me. The other party hasn't finished venting yet, and his body is still emitting an aura that attracts Omega's surrender. You don't believe me? Is that how you want to run away? Chu Ling shook his head. He didn't want to escape, but the fear and betrayal at the time of being marked was still deeply rooted in his heart. Running away is just an instinctive act because he confuses the past with the present. He didn't know how to speak, and he didn't know how to explain it better. Hanggu looked at him, resisted his desire and said, You also know that this is instinct, we can't escape. Do you want to resist like this for a lifetime? This sentence made Chu Ling speechless. He clearly knew the truth, but he was always reluctant to think about it. It was already a very painful thing to be forced to separate from Lin Xian, and now he had to indulge himself to do such intimate things with others. He couldn't accept it, and he couldn't accept it. The tears of grievance fell down like this, but I can't deceive myself. He still loves Lin Xian. This made Hanggu's expression a little weird. He restrained himself very well before saying, No one wants you to lie to yourself. Emotional and physical needs are two-way, and this does not conflict. Chu Ling was stunned by his astonishing remarks. He didn't even notice that as the two of them spoke, they were getting closer to each other. Then he suddenly raised his head and wiped the corner of Hanggu's lips inadvertently. Hanggu almost immediately lowered his head and kissed his lips. Afraid of angering Hanggu, Chu Ling didn't even dare to struggle too hard. You said, only if I agree. I remember. Hanggu didn't lose his mind because of this. He kissed Chu Ling's neck, where the Omega's sensitive glands were, and not unexpectedly heard an emotional and moving sex. He stuck out his tongue and licked it, as if the aroma lingering in his nostrils became stronger. Then I won't go in, okay? Chu Ling had been kissed so much that he almost gave up resistance, and began to talk nonsense. You have held it for too long, the breath is so strong. Help me, okay? Hanggu coaxed, I won't go in. Chu Ling seemed to struggle for a long time, and finally nodded as if to compromise. 1,000 words omitted here. 06 Probably because the consequences were too unbearable to recall, Chu Ling avoided Honggu for a while. But hiding and calming down, living under the same roof, no one can really avoid seeing each other. It's just that every so often, Chu Ling will consciously leave Honggu a little private space and time. This seems to be the case. When the female employee was gossiping about the private affairs of the boss taking care of the mistress, he was shocked by a terrible possibility. After the last estrus period, he remembered that he had taken a strong contraceptive shot in the shortest time. Logically speaking, it should be impossible, but this thought made him panic inexplicably. He hid the truth from Honggu and went to the hospital for a physical examination one day after get-off work. The hospital was crowded after get-off work, and it was past 8 o'clock in the evening after Chu Ling's examination. With the advancement of modern technology, it took less than an hour from the inspection to the result. Chu Ling didn't have to stay and wait, but he just wanted to know the result as soon as possible. He stood in the hall of the hospital, looking uneasy and absent-minded, not even aware that someone was gradually approaching him. Chu Ling. This familiar voice made Chu Ling seem to be in a dream. He almost subconsciously followed the source of the voice, Lin Xian. He didn't expect to encounter Lin Xian under such circumstances. He didn't even make any mental preparations, and his mind went blank. You. Lin Xian took a step forward with concern, but he seemed to remember the last time he accidentally threw off Chu Ling's hand, and suddenly stopped again. The two sides maintained a delicate awkward distance. Your face is not very good, is it because you are not feeling well? After he finished speaking, he lowered his head to look at Chu Ling's medical consultation form, which was already a subconscious habitual action. But Chu Ling was taken aback by his actions and hurriedly wanted to withdraw his hand, but the more anxious he became, the more panic he became. He did not grab the thin piece of paper, the receipt. It slipped from his hand and floated to Lin Xian's feet. Lin Xian bent over to pick it up, glanced up at random, and saw the words obstetrics printed on the paper. He was stunned, and looked at Chu Ling with astonishment. They all know what these two words mean. Lin Xian seemed to want to force himself to show a smile, but he couldn't. After a while, he said in a blunt voice, "Congratulations." "No, I." Chu Ling clearly saw the hurt expression on his face. He was eager to explain something, but he knew that the explanation was of no use at all, and he only felt bitter, can't say anything at all. In the end, he just returned a very light smile, which looked more like a cry than a smile. Lin Xian saw it, but at this moment he didn't even have the right to comfort the other party. The two stood in silence for a while, relatively speechless. After the two parties said goodbye, Chu Ling just kept staring at Lin Xian's back. He remembered that when the two met in high school, both of them were still teenagers who had just entered adolescence. In just a few short years, Lin Xian, an alpha, suddenly grew taller and stronger. His eyebrows and eyes widened, his shoulders widened, and his strength also changed. Big. He kept watching Lin Xian come over like this, but he didn't expect to see him leave like this one day. When he was in a trance, the nurse at the front desk called his number several times, but he didn't hear him at all. It was the person around him who was waiting to see a doctor who reminded him, and he came back to his senses. The results came out and he was not pregnant. This should have been good news for him, but his heart became even heavier. In fact, he could explain it clearly as long as he made a phone call to Lin Xian, but what if he did? At this time, he clearly realized that they could never go back to the past. The encounter with Lin Xian made the determination he finally made, easily shaken. However, this is not the only surprise tonight. When Chu Ling returned home, he realized that Honggu, who always returned late, actually left work early today. Not only that, but there is also a dinner on the table that I bought by the way. But it is now 10 o'clock in the evening, which shows that Honggu has been waiting for him for a long time. The last time I only had a brief contact with Lin Xian. Honggu noticed the breath left by Lin Xian. Although they didn't touch anything this time, he wasn't sure whether Honggu could detect it. Where have you been? After struggling for a while, Chu Ling answered truthfully, the hospital. Not feeling well. Gu Han didn't ask him why he went to the doctor, and he didn't even get angry because of his late return. He just said, is there anything wrong? No. Pay attention to your body. Chu Ling nodded, as well behaved as a primary school student who was afraid of punishment. Han Gu looked at him and sighed, you don't have to be so afraid of me. I will do what I said. Chu Ling didn't know what he was talking about, so he didn't say anything. Han Gu added, if you don't want children, I won't force you. Chu Ling understood everything at once, and said in surprise, you know I don't. He really couldn't say the word pregnancy. But Han Gu understood what he meant, nodded, and said, when the family doctor came last time, I asked him to check. Chu Ling has been living with Han Gu for a while. There is basic trust, but there is always an indescribable strangeness. Last time, he had vaguely felt a little strange, but this time it was more obvious. Not having children under his own will, these two behaviors are very contrary to Alpha's instinct. And Han Gu can make a promise so easily. If he just feels guilty about himself, he shouldn't be able to do it anyway. Han Gu didn't know what Chu Ling was thinking, he just thought that Chu Ling's silence was the default. Now that all the words were said, he didn't intend to stay in the living room, so he got up and went back to his room. Chu Ling still stood there blankly. Although he was puzzled by Han Gu's thoughts, he didn't ask. 07 Confession. When Chu Ling saw Lin Xian again, it was another month. Although Chu Ling has moved to Han Gu's place now, but the two have been together for a long time, and some living habits will inevitably overlap, which is not surprising. In the past, he avoided it as much as he could, but it has been 3 months since the breakup. Although the love still exists, those impulses at the beginning have been almost worn down. This night, he saw Lin Xian in the bookstore he used to go to on weekdays, but this time, he saw someone beside Lin Xian. A handsome man, a little thin, if not beta, probably an omega. In this modern age where inhibitors are common, the pheromones of personal attributes have been well hidden. Although 1 or 2 can be judged from physical fitness and health conditions, the accuracy rate is not high. Alpha is it is best to recognize a group of people. They are smart, outstanding, stronger, and taller than the average person, and most of them are in leadership positions. Of course, there are exceptions due to different personal physiques. The most difficult to distinguish are beta and omega. They are not very different in appearance, and it is almost impossible to distinguish them at a glance. Perhaps because of the long-term exercise, Chu Ling's physical fitness is quite good, and his appearance looks more like beta. It's hard to say if Han Gu had mistakenly thought that Chu Ling was a beta before he chose to attack him. If he is sober enough, maybe he still has a way to restrain his behavior and find Lin Xian to deal with it in time, then none of this will happen today. That's why Han Gu said that it was an accident. It was an accident. If it weren't for all kinds of coincidences, they wouldn't be bound by the AO bond now. It is not the first time that Chu Ling has struggled with this issue. Like now, he knows that he and Lin Xian are no longer possible, and he is still deeply swayed in his feelings for him. He could almost only look at the person standing beside Lin Xian with jealous eyes, but he couldn't do anything. He can't hinder Lin Xian's freedom to fall in love. He said that he hoped that Lin Xian could find someone better than himself. Even if that is counterintuitive. Chu Ling didn't know how he came home. Stimulation, and immediately fell into a low ebb. He has told himself countless times in his heart to let go, let go, let go, but he still can't do it well. He is not reconciled, he is really not reconciled. When Han Gu returned home, the room was dark. Instead of sleeping in the room, Chu Ling was drinking in the living room. The strong smell of wine permeated the whole room. Han Gu turned on the light and saw that the table and the ground were in a mess. The opened wine bottle was overturned, and the wine was poured along the edge of the table. On the ground, it looked like he had been drinking for a long time. Seeing such a situation, Han Gu narrowed his eyes dangerously. And Chu Ling seemed to be unaware and turned a blind eye. If it was normal, he would definitely feel Han Gu's strong anger, but now, he doesn't seem to care about anything. Han Gu endured not shouting immediately, and said in a suppressed tone, "Chu Ling, stop drinking. If the object is just an ordinary passerby, Han Gu may not be meddling. But in the face of his own Omega, no matter how good-tempered he is, it is difficult to restrain him." He found that all his resistance was in vain. He glanced at Han Gu with anger, and shouted in an almost resentful tone, "Don't mind me." Han Gu did not speak, but walked in the direction of Chu Ling. Chu Ling only felt uncomfortable all over, and there was an instinctive fear in the discomfort, but still stubbornly said, "It's all your fault. If it weren't for you." This is almost like telling the truth after drinking. Chu Ling finally said the words that shouldn't be said while drinking. Han Gu suddenly stopped, his face gloomy and scary. Chu Ling knew that he had said too many things, but he didn't think about regretting it. He just closed his eyes in fear, waiting for Han Gu's anger to erupt at any time. However, the expected punishment did not come, but a fluttering sentence was heard first. Han Gu said, "It's my fault." Chu Ling was stunned by this sentence. He almost forgot his fear, staring blankly as the man approached step by step and sat down beside him. Han Gu added, "You can hurt me, but you can't hurt yourself." Chu Ling didn't know what his reaction was at all. When he heard this sentence, his mind was blank. When he came back to his senses, Han Gu's hand had already touched his own corner of the eye. He suddenly felt that his eyes were blurred, and he did not know when he had burst into tears. The intimidating aura of Han Gu has completely disappeared, replaced by a gentleness that is usually hard to see. What happened? The voice was a little hoarse, and it was tired after working overtime. For some reason, hearing such an inquiry, Chu Ling only felt that all the grievances in his heart broke out at this moment. "I cried bitterly before, but at this moment, I suddenly felt that the tears were flowing non-stop, and I couldn't stop it no matter what." Drunkenness and almost suffocating sobbing surged up at the same time. He felt dizzy and could not even speak. It was a kiss that was so flat that there was hardly any sex, just pure comfort. I don't know if it was because of Han Gu's strong action or because of this gentle kiss. Chu Ling actually forgot to cry, opened his eyes and looked closely at the man's handsome face. "I'm going to kiss you again." Chu Ling took a step back in fright. But he had completely calmed down by this time, but his mind was still a little dizzy after a night of heavy drinking. Gu Han asked again, "What happened?" Chu Ling bowed his head and remained silent. He didn't know what to say to his alpha about another man, and it was because he was so jealous that he was going crazy. Although Chu Ling did not speak, Han Gu could probably guess it. From their cohabitation until now, Chu Ling's heart has always only thought of one man. Han Gu didn't know much about love, but when he looked at Chu Ling, he seemed to understand to some extent. The silence between the two did not last long. Han Gu suddenly said, "Anyway, you should blame me." Chu Ling was stunned. "My mother, an Omega woman, and my father, an Alpha, but I have never met him." Although Chu Ling didn't know why Han Gu suddenly mentioned these things, what shocked him the most was what happened next. "She was raped and completely marked by the other party, so she had to give birth to me." An indescribable feeling suddenly appeared in his heart, but he still listened to Han Gu quietly. The society at that time did not have any concept of protecting Omega. And that man never appeared again. In my impression, my mother was always anxious because she had no relationship with Alpha. She was uneasy, but she kept trying not to show it in front of me. In fact, she was not far from having a mental breakdown. If it wasn't for me, she might have committed suicide long ago. Although the government later had emergency remedies, stipulating that fully marked alphas and omegas must be married to show responsibility, which can reduce the crime rate while reducing the death rate of omegas. But there are still a lot of controversy, just like we are now. Honggu pointed out this fact bluntly, although I can't fully understand it, I can see from you, maybe from my mother, that you can't marry someone you love. It seemed like a really painful thing. I'm sorry, I don't know. Chu Ling felt dull in his heart, he wasn't sure whether it was his own feeling or the influence of the other party. He just suddenly remembered what he said just now, so he couldn't help but want to apologize. It's me who should apologize. I did the same thing as that scumbag. Honggu paused, then added, although this is very painful for you, in fact I'm glad, at least, I still have a chance to make amends. This night, Chu Ling couldn't sleep. Honggu's confession kept circling in his mind. At this time, he finally understood why this man kept apologizing to him since the first meeting. Because he thinks he has done the most unforgivable thing, the guilt from his original family has stained his existing life with a stain that can never be removed, and now such an accident has happened, it is hard to imagine what it was like heavy burden. What kind of mood did he carry all the way? Is it because of this, he has been resisting Alpha's instinct? Is it also because of this that he has been single for so long without any love experience? Chu Ling didn't know, but the dull feeling in his heart did not disappear because of this, instead it became more and more bitter. 08 The next day Honggu asked for leave for Chu Ling and went to work as usual. After Chu Ling got up and saw the message, he went back to the bed. He even had several nightmares, and he couldn't sleep well after tossing and turning, and it was difficult to wake up from his dreams. Half dreaming and half awake, the sky was completely dark, and he remembered to turn on the light, but he had no strength to move. He slept like this for an unknown length of time, until he felt someone pick him up, and the familiar alpha breath made him open his eyes in vague consciousness. Honggu said, "You have a fever, sleep again." Chu Ling didn't know whether he responded or not, but he felt that he knew that he was grabbing the other's sleeve, as if he would not let him leave. The man said again, "I'm not leaving, you go to sleep." Chu Ling wanted to say something, only to realize that his throat was hoarse and he could hardly make a sound. Alpha's breath surrounded him. Although his body was uncomfortable, his spirit was comforted. He closed his eyes as if being guided, and fell asleep again unconsciously. Chu Ling is not a person who gets sick easily. It's just that I caught a cold this time, coupled with the sudden outbreak of depression after a long-term depression in my heart, and my mood fluctuated, I was sick for several days. He didn't know how long he had slept, but every time he opened his eyes, he could see Honggu, as if he had always stayed by his side and never left. Lin Xian's face seemed to drift away between him half asleep and half awake, replaced by another man's silent tenderness. On this day, after Chu Ling woke up, his head finally stopped feeling drowsy, but his body felt fatigued because he had not eaten for a while. He glanced around, Honggu was not in the room, but he could feel that the man was still in the room. He lifted the quilt and wanted to get out of bed when Honggu opened the door and came in. In the past few days, he had developed the habit of touching Chu Ling's forehead to test his temperature first. Chu Ling's face was a little hot because of his actions. Honggu looked at his face again and said, "It's still a little hot, let's sleep for a while." Chu Ling shook his head, "I slept for too long, and my whole body was sore." The voice was hoarse due to not speaking for several days. "Then eat something." Only then did Chu Ling realize that he had been holding a bowl in his hand. He took it and looked at it, "Porridge." Honggu responded lightly, without speaking. He tasted the lightest vegetable porridge, with almost no seasoning, only the sweetness of the vegetables and the taste of the rice itself. No matter the appearance or the taste, it is not like the one bought from outside, but it is very delicious and tastes at home. Chu Ling didn't ask, but he seemed to have noticed that Honggu likes to eat porridge, which may have something to do with his mother. No one said a word until Chu Ling finished eating. Chu Ling recovered from his illness, and Honggu started to work frantically overtime again. Originally, the boss's job was not easy, and he took extra time to take care of Chu Ling. Now all the schedules had to be arranged together. Chu Ling hasn't seen Honggu for nearly a week. He is very annoyed that he has caused Honggu's burden, and he also regrets his words and actions that night when he was drunk. Omegas are mostly sentimental, and Chu Ling is no exception. Anyone who knows about Honggu cannot remain indifferent. The original complaints seem to have faded, and there is also a vague feeling of distress. After the serious illness, Chu Ling seemed to really look away. Even if he occasionally thinks of Lin Xian, he still feels uncomfortable, but he is no longer impulsive. The time has entered the 4th month. Honggu's workload has not decreased at all, but it has intensified more than when he first lived together. Chu Ling couldn't help frowning at the time every night. So one night, Chu Ling couldn't help but meddle in his own business. After he finished eating at home, he made some food to take to Honggu's company. He thought that even if he couldn't help, he should be able to deliver supper or something. Since they lived together until now, Honggu has always been helping him, and he has hardly done anything for each other. Even if it is not love, they have long been each other's obligations and responsibilities. Chu Ling used various excuses to persuade himself and set off with a late-night snack. It was the first time he came to Honggu's company, and he was a little nervous. He knew that there were several companies under Honggu's name. Most of the employees had already left work at this time. The lights on most floors were dark, and the lights in only a few offices were on. Chu Ling greeted the security guard and went straight to the top floor after confirming that no prior notification was required. He called outside the door, but still no response. Chu Ling guessed that Honggu might have fallen asleep accidentally, so he turned the doorknob with his hand, found that it was unlocked, and walked in directly. There is no one in the office, only the lamp in front of the desk is on, the documents are neatly placed on the desk, and there are many unprocessed projects, which are piled high on the side. Chu Ling didn't dare to look at Honggu's work indiscriminately, and only put the things he brought on the short table next to him, and looked around while thinking about where Honggu went. At this time, he realized that there seemed to be a small room for rest inside, and a dim and ambiguous yellow light shone from under the door. He walked to the small room, thinking that if Honggu fell asleep, don't disturb him, just take a look and leave. Chu Ling suddenly had a subtle feeling in his heart that he couldn't tell, but somehow, he reached out and turned the door handle. His voice was a little uncertain, Honggu. Even though the door only opened a crack, the passion and that came out of the crack already clearly indicated what the people inside were doing. Chu Ling broke in by mistake, but it was too late to escape. The fully marked Alpha and Omega have sensed each other's existence and are eagerly longing for each other. Chu Ling's body walked forward uncontrollably, and the person behind the door suddenly opened the door and pulled people into the room. Chu Ling fell into Honggu's arms, and then was heavily pressed against the door. His face was flushed, his legs were so soft that he could barely stand, and he couldn't bear the instinct to surrender to the other party. Honggu is like a king with strong ambition at this moment, eager to attack the enemy in front of him and expand his territory. 09 The satisfaction of marking again made Honggu even more immersed in sex. He lifted Chu Ling's chin, kissed it domineeringly, his tongue went straight through his teeth, and he kept attacking the city and looting the ground. Pressing against the sensitive palate, sweeping the soft flesh under the tongue, covering the slippery tongue, plundering the other's breath, the sympathetic breath in the air and the sweet taste in the mouth made him even more addicted. At this moment, he almost forgot about Lin Xian. The nearly 4-month blank window had never been filled with desire, which made the outbreak of even more violent. People in front of you combine. But the remaining sense of reason made him realize the situation in front of him, probably because of the busy work these days. Honggu's physical desires have not been relieved for too long. Just at this time, he broke in again. Woo! There was a sudden pain on the lips. Just the pheromone revealed by the smell of blood made each other excited, not to mention being stared at by such aggressive eyes. Chu Ling couldn't take his eyes off. He watched Honggu make these seductive behaviors up close, as if waiting for his prey to voluntarily take the bait, and the sexiness was overwhelming. He was trembling all over, his throat was thirsty, his skin was hot, and the depths of his body were disturbed, and he was about to say "fuck me" as shameful words. But Chu Ling still insisted and did not let go, biting the lip that was bitten just now and bleeding again. This sentence is omitted. The spirit is still resisting, but the body is yielding. At this moment, Chu Ling probably didn't realize that his rejection was no longer because of Lin Xian, but because of Han Gu's loss of control. If he knew that he had succumbed to his instincts again to do such a thing, I am afraid that he would be even more unable to forgive himself. Chu Ling didn't want to see such a thing happen at all, so even if it was a misunderstanding, it didn't matter. He couldn't bear to see Han Gu's hurt expression again. From the AO bond alone, Alpha has a strong desire to protect Omega, and vice versa for Omega. Chu Ling used this high-sounding reason to persuade himself and insisted not to let himself sink, even though he couldn't support it for long. But only determination is useless. In the face of primitive desire, everything can only return to the most primitive solution: force. Obviously, Chu Ling couldn't beat Han Gu. This sentence is omitted. Conquest can excite and bring pleasure, and it is a joy that is more than physical. That's an alpha's natural instinct. This sentence is omitted. He closed his eyes in despair, his face was covered with tears, but in the end he didn't seem to give up resistance, and whispered the man's name, Han Gu. But these two words suddenly came into play, like some kind of emergency stop switch. Han Gu froze his body, regained consciousness at the last moment, and cursed. "Why are you here?" Han Gu immediately pulled the distance between them too close, the corners of his eyes turned red because of restraint, and his tone was very fierce because of restraint. Alpha's coercion exists all the time. Chu Ling quickly answered his question, "I brought supper here, for you." Han Gu was stunned for a while, and almost lost control because of this sentence. He simply opened the door neatly, pushed Chu Ling out, and turned his back. "Get out now, hurry up." Chu Ling sat on the ground in embarrassment, but did not move or speak. At this moment, there was the sound of the elevator opening the door. Probably people on other floors heard the movement just now, so they went upstairs to check. Han Gu glanced at the naked Chu Ling, and immediately pulled him back to the room and closed the door. After tidying up a little, he sat at his desk and pretended to be busy. The manager of the planning department came up. As expected, he came upstairs to have a look after hearing something. Han Gu said something knocked over and sent the person away. Han Gu sat for a while, and seemed to be waiting for Chu Ling to put on clothes. Chu Ling sent it back. He knew how dangerous it was to stay by his side at such a time. He counted the time before he went to open the door. Although Chu Ling was dressed, his expression was a little strange, and his body was even trembling slightly. Han Gu's eyes caught a glimpse of his neck that couldn't hide the bite marks. This sentence is omitted, and immediately knew the reason. As for the fully marked Omega, the bitten body can only be considered to increase the N interest at most, but Chu Ling has been abstinent since the last estrus period. The room with alpha breath, for him now, is equivalent to playing the role of Omega's estrus. Han Gu frowned instantly. He was not angry at Chu Ling, but at himself. So, after finishing this, he sat on the spacious sofa and said to Chu Ling, "Come here, I will help you." Chu Ling hurriedly shook his head. The terrifying seduction of Han Gu just now is still lingering in his mind, and he does not dare to look directly into the eyes of the other party. "I won't." Han Gu seemed to want to promise something, but as soon as he said the words, he immediately remembered what he had done. Chu Ling didn't want to see Han Gu's lost appearance, and explained, "I don't believe you." Han Gu sighed, "Do you want to go back like this? Don't say it's the other party." Han Gu himself is not much better, and the bulge of his lower body is more exaggerated than his. I am afraid that as long as Chu Ling stays here, he can only maintain this state. Chu Ling accidentally glanced at it just now, and did not dare to look again. Honggu tried his best to calm himself. Is it okay to be like last time? Yes. He couldn't help it. Chu Ling walked over awkwardly, as if hesitating for something. What's wrong? Can I not see your face? Honggu thought for a moment, patted his lap, and said, sit up with your back to me. Omitted below. 10:37.6 degrees Celsius, body temperature is a bit high. Chu Ling asked the family doctor to check while rubbing his flushed face. When he came out of Honggu's company this morning, he felt that something was wrong, so he reluctantly went to work, and he didn't call the family doctor until after get off work. Did it go too far last night? No, stop thinking about it. Probably due to staying up late. He felt a little dry for some reason, picked up the cup and took a sip of water. Unexpectedly, after seeing his movements, the doctor asked coldly, have you had recently? Pfft. Cough, cough. Chu Ling was frightened by this sentence and coughed for a while before saying, do you have to ask so directly? The doctor said naturally, of course, I am your family doctor. Chu Ling struggled for a while before answering implicitly, it doesn't count, but there is physical contact. The doctor asked, how often is this physical contact? Chu Ling frowned, no. The doctor hummed and said nothing. Chu Ling was confused by the doctor's attitude, what's wrong? What's wrong with my body? Is it serious? That's not. The doctor seemed to be considering how to express it. After all, when he was hired by Honggu as a family doctor, he knew something about the situation of the two. But after thinking about it, he decided to tell the truth, it should be said that you may be approaching the estrus period. Chu Ling was stunned for a moment, shouldn't it be a month and a half? It was only now that Chu Ling knew why the doctor asked such a question. He remembered the impact of marking him again last night. Based on the doctor's words, his condition was probably caused by long-term suppression of desire. But there is another possibility. The doctor spoke out his inner thoughts instead of him, Mr. Han is a very good alpha. If both effects are present, premature estrus also seems unlikely. Chu Ling clenched his hands a little uneasy and asked, if this is the case for a long time, will it affect alpha? Chu Ling's speech was euphemistically incomprehensible, but this Dr. Beta still understood. He replied objectively, both sides, it's just that omega is easy to react physically, while alpha is mentally. As soon as she mentioned the spiritual aspect, Chu Ling immediately thought of Honggu and tensed her body unconsciously. The doctor saw Chu Ling's appearance, but misunderstood, don't be nervous, I believe that Mr. Han is not someone who can make things difficult for others. Chu Ling asked, do I have any choice? You only have two choices, alpha and estrus-specific inhibitors. Under normal circumstances, a normal doctor will certainly not say the latter choice, but in special circumstances, only involuntary taggers like Chu Ling can have other options. Since being marked, Chu Ling's mentality has always been good, but it is obvious that the doctor misunderstood something from Chu Ling's reaction just now, so he made this suggestion, following instinct is the most natural and safe method, which can help most people. Omegas got through safely, but if you rely on inhibitors alone, the harm to the body is great. Chu Ling frowned after hearing this, how is that different from the inhibitors I used before? Why is there such a difference? The doctor explained, before the labeling, you were an individual, and you could extract the ingredients of the inhibitor with only your own blood, but after the complete labeling, the omega has been combined with alpha's pheromone and blood blending is no longer a complete individual in medicine. In science, 1 plus 1 is not equal to 2 for many substances, and genetics is particularly complicated. Experts still cannot explain the mystery of complete marking, so the created inhibitors are also pretty limited. So I don't recommend it, it's a kind of counterintuitive thing in itself. The doctor said painstakingly, the purpose is still to dispel Chu Ling's idea of using an inhibitor. I see. You need to tell me in the next few days. Will you tell Honggu about our conversation tonight? Of course it's my responsibility. Before leaving, the doctor said, before the estrus period comes, there may be a high level of sex. If possible, it is better to need appropriate relief. Chu Ling blushed and sent the doctor away. He sighed inexplicably. He was almost tempted to Hanggu last night. If the process had not been blocked by the other party, he might have said something like, "You don't have to be patient," to Hanggu. Yes, he remembered, that was what he nearly blurted out last night. Chu Ling struggled with this for a whole day, but if he was only affected by the estrus period to have this impulse, it seemed that it would not be so difficult to accept. People's mentality is always very subtle, and naturally they want to compare their past experiences. When he fell in love with Lin Xian, it was a long-running process, and it was a matter of course. Although there was not much unforgettable process, the love lasted for years and deepened with time. Compared to Lin Xian, who had been with him for 8 years, it only took him 4 months to become attracted to another man, which was obviously something he couldn't accept. But before Chu Ling could reply to the family doctor, Hanggu had already made a decision for him to make an inhibitor. Chu Ling was stunned when he found out, but he was still a little dissatisfied. He blamed this dissatisfaction on the fact that Hanggu made his own decisions without consulting him at all. But he couldn't lose his temper either, because Hanggu was so busy that he couldn't even go home once a week. Chu Ling Sheng was sulking and felt distressed again after a while, so this matter was over.